Let me be honest, we never loved you. Your existence is just an exhausting responsibility. The clinking of crystal glasses stopped immediately. 40 guests sat in dead silence around the long mahogany table. I simply stood up, smoothed my dress, and smiled. Thank you for the honesty. Have a wonderful evening. Then I walked out the front door. The next morning, my phone lit up with 89 missed calls. My name is Alyssa. I am 33 years old and I am the director of real estate acquisitions for a major Manhattan investment fund. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through a family betrayal and execute a flawless revenge. The night began like every other forced family gathering at my parents' Connecticut estate. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the catered dinner, masking the cold reality of our family dynamic. It was my 33rd birthday, a milestone that William and Catherine insisted on hosting. They loved playing the perfect affluent suburban couple for their country club friends. I sat near the end of the table sipping my water, listening to Madison brag loudly about her startup. Madison was 30, the undisputed golden child. She leaned against her husband DeAndre. He was a fast-talking finance broker who wore luxury watches he could not actually afford. As the waiters cleared our plates, DeAndre leaned across the table, a smug grin on his face. "So, Alyssa," DeAndre said, his voice carrying over the low hum of conversation, still grinding away at that corporate desk. "Madison just pitched her wellness app to angel investors. Being an entrepreneur is where the real wealth is." I did not bother telling him that his wife had bankrupted 3 previous companies within months, or that my corporate desk was an executive role managing billions. I just offered a polite smile. "I am happy with my career." Madison rolled her eyes and rested her hand on his arm. "Do not bother, baby. Some people lack the vision for greatness. They prefer being employees." Before I could reply, the sharp ringing of a silver spoon tapping against a champagne flute echoed through the dining room. William stood adjusting his tailored suit jacket. The room quieted down. Everyone turned their attention to my father, expecting the traditional heartwarming speech. "Thank you all for coming tonight," William began, his voice booming with practiced authority. "Birthdays are a time for reflection, a time to look at the family we have built and the legacy we are leaving behind." He turned to Catherine, who rose gracefully from her chair. She held her champagne glass delicately by the stem. The guests smiled, waiting for the loving words a mother usually shares. Instead, Catherine looked directly at me, her eyes devoid of warmth, her perfectly applied lipstick stretched into a cruel, calculated smile. "Alyssa," Catherine said, her voice ringing clear and steady in the silent room. "Everyone always asks me how I manage raising a brilliant entrepreneur like Madison while dealing with you. Tonight, since we are surrounded by our closest friends, let me be honest. We never loved you. Your existence is just an exhausting responsibility. You have always been a burden to this family, a constant reminder of mediocrity." The entire room froze. The silence was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Not a single person moved. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Madison and DeAndre snickering into their wine glasses, enjoying the public humiliation they had undoubtedly helped orchestrate. They expected me to break down. They wanted tears shouting or a desperate plea for affection. They wanted the awkward, rejected scapegoat to finally shatter in front of their wealthy peers. Instead, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The decades of trying to earn their approval vanished in an instant. I reached for my napkin and placed it neatly beside my plate. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my custom navy blue dress. I looked straight into Catherine's eyes, matching her coldness, with a serene, unshakable calm. "Thank you for the honesty," I said. "Have a wonderful evening." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the grand foyer. I did not look back. I walked out the heavy oak doors into the crisp autumn air. My private car was waiting. I slid into the back seat and closed the door, sealing away the toxic noise. As the car pulled away, I opened an encrypted banking application on my phone. I navigated to a specific portfolio, highlighting the accounts holding the massive fraudulent debts my family owed me. I hovered my thumb over the screen, feeling a calm thrill of anticipation. I pressed execute. The morning sun poured brightly through the towering floor-to-ceiling windows of my spacious Manhattan penthouse, casting a warm and inviting golden glow across the pristine Brazilian hardwood floors. I woke up feeling lighter than I had in 3 decades. There was no lingering sadness, no heavy chest, and no tears over the family I had finally walked away from. I stretched, enjoying the absolute silence of my bedroom, before walking into the kitchen to start my espresso machine. The rich aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the air as I finally picked up my phone from the marble counter. The screen lit up instantly, flooded with notifications. Exactly 89 missed calls. The breakdown was exactly as I had predicted. 30 from my mother Catherine, 25 from my father William, 20 from my sister Madison, and 14 from my brother-in-law DeAndre. My thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling past the frantic text messages demanding I pick up the phone. I bypassed all the incoming calls and tapped directly into my voicemail inbox. DeAndre had left a 3-minute message at exactly 7 in the morning. I pressed play and put the phone on the counter, letting his voice echo through my pristine kitchen. The arrogant, slick finance broker tone he usually wore like a cheap suit was completely gone. In its place was sheer, unadulterated panic. "Alyssa, pick up the damn phone," DeAndre shouted, his breath ragged, accompanied by the sound of car horns honking loudly in the background. "What did you do?" "I am standing outside of Del Frisco right now, and I just experienced the most humiliating moment of my entire life. I was hosting a closing breakfast with 3 major executives from a private equity firm. The bill comes, I hand them my platinum card, and it gets declined." "Declined, Alyssa?" "I had to use 4 different cards, and every single one came back frozen. Do you know how I looked in front of those investors? They walked out." "The deal is dead." His voice cracked, shifting from rage to sheer desperation. "I called Madison to get her to wire me the funds from her startup accounts, but her business lines are frozen too. The bank said a primary debt holder initiated a total asset freeze. Madison is having a massive panic attack on the bathroom floor because the payroll checks for her app developers just bounced. My leased Porsche was almost towed this morning because the auto payments did not clear. What kind of sick revenge is this? You get your feelings hurt at a birthday party, so you hack into the family accounts to ruin us. You need to call the bank right now and reverse this before I call the police and have you arrested for cybercrimes. Call me back." The voicemail ended with a sharp beep. I took a slow sip of my espresso, letting the dark, bitter flavor wash over my tongue. It was fascinating how quickly the illusion of their wealth crumbled the second the actual money supply was restricted. DeAndre loved to parade around at family dinners, giving me unsolicited advice about how to manage my meager salary. He loved flashing his luxury watches and bragging about his high broker commissions to anyone who would listen to him. Yet the moment his access to the family credit line was severed, his entire life fell apart instantly. He could not even pay for a simple steak breakfast, without relying on the money my parents had fraudulently secured. I set my coffee cup down and picked up my phone. I had no intention of explaining anything to him over a phone call. I did not need to justify my actions or defend myself against his baseless threats of calling the police. The authorities would certainly be involved soon enough, but not for the reasons DeAndre thought. The financial web they had spun was intricate, but I had spent the last 5 years meticulously untangling every single thread. They had lived like royalty on borrowed time and stolen credit. Madison's supposed tech empire was nothing more than a series of empty shell companies bleeding cash to fund her designer wardrobe and her husband's flashy lifestyle. They had treated me like a pathetic outcast, completely unaware that I was the one holding the keys to their entire kingdom. I calmly opened a brand new text message addressed directly to DeAndre and typed a simple 4-word response. I did not include any apologies, any explanations, or any warnings about the incoming storm that was about to hit them. I just typed the short message, hit send, without hesitation, and tossed the phone back onto the cold marble kitchen island. The final message simply read, "Check your emails now." I slipped my phone into my leather tote bag and headed out the front door. My driver was already waiting downstairs in the lobby to take me directly to the financial district. At 33 years old, I was the absolute youngest director of real estate acquisitions at Vanguard Sterling Holdings. My arrogant family always assumed I was just some low-level desk clerk endlessly processing boring paperwork. They had absolutely no idea I successfully managed a corporate portfolio worth well over $6 billion. I walked onto the bustling trading floor, the familiar aggressive hum of high-stakes finance instantly greeting me. My dedicated team was already gathered inside the massive glass-walled conference room, anxiously waiting for my final decisive approval on the total liquidation of a struggling commercial real estate firm. I calmly took my seat at the head of the table and opened the thick dossier. The desperate executives from the failing firm sat across from me, visibly sweating in their expensive custom suits. They nervously tried to pitch a new restructuring plan, practically begging for a brief grace period. I quickly cut them off after exactly 2 minutes. Your debt-to-equity ratio is unsustainable, and your assets are over-leveraged, I said, pushing the contract across the table. We are not granting an extension. Vanguard is absorbing your properties effective immediately. Sign the transfer documents or we force a hostile bankruptcy by noon. They signed. It was ruthless, but it was legal and precise. I did not operate on emotion. I operated on leverage. Just as the defeated executives filed out of the room, my assistant rushed through the glass doors. She looked completely frantic, clutching her tablet to her chest. "I apologize for interrupting, Alyssa," she said, her voice breathy with panic. "But your father is blowing up the main corporate switchboard. He has called 12 times in the last 20 minutes. He is screaming at the receptionist, threatening to call the federal authorities and demanding to be put through to your office. He says you committed cyber terrorism against his family." I sighed, leaning back in my leather ergonomic chair. The theatrics were so typical of William. He always used big threatening words when he felt his control slipping away. "Transfer the call to my private line," I told her, "and tell security to flag his name just in case he decides to take a train into the city." My assistant nodded quickly and scurried out of the room. I walked back into my private office, closed the heavy glass door, and pressed the flashing button on my desk console. Before I could even say a word, William exploded through the speakerphone. "You ungrateful little witch!" he roared. His voice was completely unhinged, cracking with a rage I had not heard since I was a teenager. "What the hell did you do to our bank accounts? I am standing at the country club and my card was declined for a simple breakfast tab. DeAndre just called me crying that his corporate cards are dead. Did you hire some hacker to lock us out? I am calling the police, Alyssa. I am calling the FBI. You are going to federal prison for this. You do not just throw a tantrum at a birthday dinner and then commit cyber terrorism against your own blood," I let him scream. I listened to his panicked, heavy breathing echoing through my quiet office. It was music to my ears. He was so used to bullying people into submission, so used to throwing his weight around to get exactly what he wanted. He genuinely believed I was just a petty, emotional woman lashing out with a cheap computer trick. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice calm and entirely devoid of emotion. William choked on his own rage. "Turn the cards back on right now," he demanded. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished desk. "Nobody hacked your accounts, William. Your assets are not experiencing a technical glitch. They are completely frozen because you are in default. You are not a victim of cybercrime. You are a victim of your own financial incompetence." "What are you talking about?" he stammered, the anger faltering into genuine confusion. "I do not have a glitch. I have money." "You have debt," I corrected him sharply. "And the primary debt holder just initiated a total foreclosure on every single asset tied to your name. Your credit lines are dead. Your accounts are seized." I paused, letting the reality of his situation sink in for a brief second before delivering the final crushing blow. "And if you want to know who that debt holder is, I suggest you ask your darling son-in-law what he found in his email inbox." I hung up the phone. Tearing down the interstate toward Manhattan, DeAndre was aggressively white-knuckling the steering wheel of his leased SUV. I knew exactly what was happening in that car, because I knew how toxic they were. DeAndre had opened the email I sent. It contained a formal notice of default demanding immediate repayment in full. But instead of accepting reality, he was busy spinning a web of delusions to protect his fragile ego. He glanced at Madison, who was frantically refreshing her banking apps, her acrylic nails tapping aggressively against her phone screen. "She is just a bitter, jealous spinster," DeAndre sneered, stepping on the gas pedal. "She has no husband. She has no life outside of whatever boring corporate cubicle she sits in. You are a brilliant entrepreneur. You are building an empire. She cannot stand the fact that you are the beautiful, successful golden child, and she is a lonely failure." Madison eagerly swallowed every word. It was easier to believe I was a vindictive villain than admit her businesses were complete financial disasters. "You are right," Madison said, her voice trembling with misplaced righteous indignation. "I have 3 active startups. I am an innovator. She is probably using some illegal loophole to temporarily freeze our assets just to ruin my momentum. My developers need to be paid today. We will march into her sad little office, threaten her with a lawsuit, and force her to undo whatever cyber-sabotage she committed." They fueled each other's delusions the entire drive into the city, convincing themselves I was nothing more than a pathetic, emotional woman throwing a tantrum over a birthday toast. They had no idea they were driving straight into a financial slaughterhouse. While they fed their unearned superiority complex in traffic, I made my final preparations. I walked to the secure filing cabinet tucked into the corner of my private office. I slowly unlocked the drawer and pulled out a thick red folder. This folder contained 5 years of meticulous, indisputable documentation. It held the original loan applications, the transfer deeds, the default notices, and the undeniable proof of my parents' federal crimes. I placed the red folder perfectly in the dead center of the polished glass desk. I smoothed my hands over the cover, feeling profound satisfaction. This was my weapon. I did not need to scream, cry, or throw glasses to make a point. I just needed ink paper and the ruthless execution of corporate law. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, checked my luxury watch, and waited patiently. I knew their exact estimated time of arrival. I had spent my entire life being pushed to the side, treated as an afterthought, and mocked for my dedication to my career. Today, my career was going to be the exact instrument of their destruction. The corporate trading floor outside my office was a symphony of ringing phones and aggressive negotiations, the perfect backdrop for the reckoning that was about to take place. Right on schedule, the heavy glass doors of the executive suite swung open violently. I could hear the loud commotion brewing out by the reception desk before I even saw their faces. Madison's shrill voice echoed across the trading floor, demanding to know where my cubicle was located. DeAndre was right behind her, shouting at my assistant and threatening to call the authorities if they were not given immediate access to my workspace. 2 of our building security guards, both massive men in dark suits, immediately intercepted them. The guards stood firm, blocking the hallway that led to my private office. "Sir, you cannot be back here," the lead guard stated firmly, putting a large hand on DeAndre's chest to stop his forward momentum. "You need to wait in the lobby, or I will have you forcibly removed from the premises right now. Do not touch me," DeAndre barked, slapping the security guard hand away. "You have absolutely no idea who I am. My sister-in-law works here, and she is committing severe financial fraud against my family. I am going to see her right now." Madison tried to push past the second guard, her face red with entitlement and rage. "Let us through," she screamed, completely ignoring the stares of 50 high-level investment bankers watching the spectacle unfold. "Where is she? Where is Alyssa?" I stood up from my chair and walked slowly toward the open doorway of my office. I leaned casually against the doorframe, watching them struggle against the security team like trapped animals. The sheer panic in their eyes was exquisite. I raised my hand and signaled to the guards. "Step aside, gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through their chaotic screaming. "Let them in. They are just in time for their audit. Madison did not hesitate. She stormed past the security guards, her expensive stiletto heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, and marched straight up to my glass desk. She slammed both of her hands down on the pristine surface, her manicured nails tapping aggressively. Her face was flushed with a mixture of entitlement and sheer outrage. "Unlock the accounts right now, Alyssa," she demanded, her voice shrill enough to carry out to the trading floor. "This is exactly why nobody in the family can stand you. You are so petty and jealous. Just because Mom finally told you the truth last night, you think you can throw a tantrum and ruin my businesses? You could not handle being the unloved sister, so you decided to play hacker and sabotage my life." DeAndre stood right behind her, adjusting his designer tie and nodding in agreement. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to look intimidating in his custom-tailored suit. "You have gone way too far this time, Alyssa," he sneered. "You are messing with millions of dollars of operational capital. Madison is a visionary. She is building an empire while you push papers for somebody else. Turn the cards back on before I call the authorities and have you escorted out of this building in handcuffs." I looked at both of them, completely unfazed by their loud performative anger. They were so accustomed to bullying their way through life, using my parents' money as a shield against any real consequences. They genuinely believed their own fabricated narrative. I slowly reached out and pulled a thick leather-bound ledger from the corner of my desk. I opened it perfectly to a dog-eared page, smoothing my hand over the crisp financial printouts. "Building an empire." I repeated, my voice calm and steady. "That is a fascinating way to describe massive corporate fraud." Madison scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "I have 3 highly successful startups. I am an innovator. You would not understand the first thing about venture capital." I looked down at the ledger, running my finger down the columns of red ink. "Let us talk about your 3 successful startups, Madison. Let us start with your flagship wellness app, Zenith Core. According to your filed tax returns, the app generated exactly $14,000 in legitimate revenue last year. However, the company somehow managed to spend $450,000 on marketing and executive compensation." Madison opened her mouth to argue, but I did not let her speak. I turned the page. "Then there is your organic skincare line, Purely Madison, a company that currently has 0 inventory, no manufacturing contracts, and no actual customers. Yet the corporate account shows a monthly withdrawal of $12,000 explicitly labeled as a consulting fee, which is deposited directly into DeAndre's personal checking account." DeAndre's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, but the 2 security guards standing by the door immediately shifted their weight silently, warning him to stay back. "And finally," I said, looking directly at DeAndre, "we have the crown jewel of your empire. The boutique consulting firm that supposedly advises high-net-worth clients. A firm that has never filed a single client invoice. But it does hold the lease on a brand-new Porsche 911, and it routinely pays the monthly balance on a platinum credit card used almost exclusively at luxury steakhouses and high-end watch boutiques." I closed the ledger with a sharp, resounding snap that made Madison physically flinch. "You do not have 3 successful startups, Madison. You have 3 shell companies. They exist for the sole purpose of bleeding cash from fraudulent loans to fund your husband's pathetic obsession with looking wealthy. You are not an innovator. You are a liability." The color completely drained from Madison's face. She looked back at DeAndre, panic suddenly replacing her previous arrogance. "What is she talking about?" Madison asked, her voice dropping to a nervous whisper. "DeAndre, what consulting fee?" DeAndre completely ignored his wife. He slammed his hand against the glass partition wall, his face contorting with rage. "You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I am a licensed financial broker. I understand market leverage. You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to destroy us because your parents despise you. I am walking out of here right now, and I am calling the best corporate lawyers in Manhattan." I will sue you for financial sabotage, defamation, and corporate espionage. I will take every single thing you own, Alyssa. You are going to be completely bankrupt by Friday. DeAndre leaned heavily across the glass desk, his tailored suit jacket straining against his broad shoulders. The aggressive posture was a classic intimidation tactic he likely learned in some overpriced executive seminar. He genuinely believed volume and physical presence could overwrite the disastrous financial reality I had just exposed. You are bluffing, Alyssa. DeAndre sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. You sit here in this fancy office playing pretend, but you do not actually understand how corporate structuring works. Madison businesses are fully backed by legitimate institutional debt. We secured those operational loans through a major equity fund. You cannot just magically freeze accounts you do not own because you are throwing a tantrum. I did not blink. I did not shift in my chair. I simply looked at him, letting the heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch between us. The absolute certainty in his voice was staggering. For a man who claimed to be a licensed financial broker, his lack of basic due diligence was astounding. I slowly leaned back, resting my hands on the armrests of my chair. A major equity fund. I repeated, my tone entirely conversational. That is a fascinating way to describe your creditors. Tell me, DeAndre, as the brilliant financial mind of the family, did you ever actually bother to check who owns the paper on your wife's failing companies? DeAndre scoffed loudly, waving his hand in the air as if swatting away a fly. Of course I know who holds the debt. It is a private hedge fund called Apex Capital. They specialize in high-risk venture funding. They are a massive, faceless conglomerate. You have absolutely zero leverage over a firm like Apex, so you can stop playing these stupid games and unlock the damn accounts. Madison, who had been standing rigidly beside her husband, seemed to draw a tiny fraction of confidence from his arrogant declaration. She crossed her arms, jutting her chin out defensively. Exactly, Madison chimed in, her voice, regaining some of its usual shrill entitlement. DeAndre handled all the financing. We are dealing with real Wall Street investors, Alyssa, not some low-level desk clerks. You are in way over your head. If you do not reverse whatever cyber trick you pulled, Apex Capital will destroy you for interfering with their assets. I let a small, genuine smile touch the corners of my mouth. It was almost too easy. They had walked right into the trap, blinded by their own unearned superiority. I reached into the breast pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp, heavy stock business card. I held it lightly between my index and middle finger, pausing just long enough to let the anticipation build. A massive, faceless conglomerate, I echoed softly. I suppose that is one way to describe it. I flicked my wrist, sending the business card sliding smoothly across the polished glass desk. It came to a perfect stop right in front of DeAndre. He glared at me suspiciously before looking down at the card. Madison leaned over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she read the embossed silver lettering. The text on the card was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating. It read, Apex Capital, a wholly owned subsidiary of Vanguard Sterling Holdings. Directly underneath that, it listed my name and my exact corporate title. DeAndre stared at the small piece of cardboard. The color began to drain from his face, replaced by an ashen, sickly hue. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked from the card to me and then back to the card, his brain struggling to process the monumental magnitude of his own stupidity. Madison grabbed the card, her acrylic nails scraping against the glass. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice wavering. "What does this mean?" "It means," I said, leaning forward and lowering my voice to a dangerous, icy whisper, "that Apex Capital is not a faceless conglomerate. It is a specialized debt acquisition fund that I personally created and manage. For the last 3 years, I have been quietly buying up the high-risk, toxic debt of companies that are essentially guaranteed to fail. Companies exactly like yours." Madison dropped the business card as if it had physically burned her. She stumbled back a half step, her eyes wide with sudden suffocating terror. DeAndre remained frozen, his chest rising and falling rapidly as the realization finally hit him. "I did not hack your accounts, Madison. I continued enunciating every single word with deliberate precision. I did not commit cyber-sabotage. I simply executed my legal right as your sole primary creditor. I called in the debt. Every single cent that you owe to me. I own your businesses. I own your credit lines. I own the very illusion of wealth you have been desperately clinging to. Madison turned completely pale, her knees buckled slightly, and she had to grab the edge of the desk to steady herself. The arrogant golden child persona she had worn for 3 decades shattered into a million pieces right in front of my eyes. She finally understood the horrific reality of her situation. Her sister was not just a bitter outcast. Her sister was the executioner. DeAndre swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "This is illegal," he stammered, his voice lacking any of its previous conviction. "You cannot just secretly buy our debt. That is a conflict of interest. It is perfectly legal," I assured him cheerfully. "It is called distressed asset acquisition. And it is entirely your fault for not reading the fine print of your own loan agreements. But do not worry, DeAndre. The debt acquisition is actually the least of your legal problems right now." I reached out and rested my hand flat on top of the thick red folder I had placed on the desk earlier. "Because the real issue," I said, watching his eyes lock onto the folder, "is how you managed to secure those massive loans in the first place." I flipped open the heavy cover of the red folder. The stark white pages inside were covered in dense legal jargon, banking seals, and notarized stamps. These were the original origination documents for the commercial loans that breathed life into Madison's fake empire. I watched DeAndre's eyes track my movements. As a licensed broker, he knew exactly what these forms were. He recognized the distinct corporate letterhead of the lending institution. I slid the first heavy stack of papers across the glass desk, pushing them right to the edge where he stood. "Read the guarantor section," I instructed him, tapping my manicured finger against the bottom right corner of the page. Madison scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "Dad secured that seed money for me," she declared with absolute arrogant certainty. "He told us he leveraged the equity in the Connecticut estate to give me my initial capital. He believes in my vision. He would never do anything illegal to fund my businesses." I did not even look at her. I kept my gaze locked entirely on DeAndre. "Read it aloud, DeAndre," I demanded softly. "Tell your visionary wife exactly whose pristine credit profile was used to underwrite every single dollar her company's ever spent." He hesitated before picking up the documents. His hands were trembling slightly as his eyes scanned the typed text, searching for the truth. He flipped to the second page, his breathing growing increasingly shallow. "The primary guarantor listed here is you," he whispered, looking up at me with sheer disbelief. "The entire credit profile used to secure these commercial loans belongs to Alyssa." Madison snatched the papers aggressively out of his hands, her eyes darting wildly across the black ink. "No, that is impossible," she stammered, her voice losing its shrill edge. "Why would Dad use your name instead of his own? Because William and Catherine completely bankrupted themselves a decade ago, trying to maintain a lavish lifestyle they could not afford," I explained coldly. "Their credit scores are practically non-existent. They are buried under secret debt. No legitimate commercial bank would ever lend them a single dime. So when their golden child desperately needed $1 million to play businesswoman in the city, they decided to steal the financial identity of the daughter they openly despised." "Look at the final signature line on the last page," I told Madison. She flipped the heavy document over. There, scrawled in sloppy blue ink, was my forged name. I leaned forward, resting my elbows firmly on the glass desk. "That loan was executed and notarized on October 14th, exactly 5 years ago. I was living in London at that time, completing an intensive fellowship in international real estate acquisitions. I have the flight records, the official passport stamps, and the corporate security logs, proving I was physically standing inside a high-rise in the United Kingdom on the exact day that signature was supposedly witnessed back in Connecticut. That is not just a petty family misunderstanding," I continued, my voice sharp and unwavering in the quiet office. "That is severe federal identity theft. That is massive bank fraud." My parents illegally used my pristine credit score, forged my signature, and wired millions of dollars across state lines to fund your vanity projects and his luxury car lease payments. Every single physical and liquid asset you currently possess was purchased with stolen money. You are sitting on top of a massive federal crime. DeAndre dropped the papers back onto the desk as if they were covered in burning acid. His entire body went rigid. As a licensed financial professional, DeAndre instantly understood the catastrophic magnitude of what I had just revealed. If the Securities and Exchange Commission found out his lavish lifestyle was funded by federal wire fraud, he would not just lose his prestigious broker license, he would face severe criminal charges and potential prison time for directly benefiting from the stolen funds. He had filed joint tax returns. He had signed the luxury lease agreements. He was legally implicated in their massive web of financial lies. He had personally enjoyed the benefits of that stolen capital every single day for the past 5 years. He knew the authorities would never believe he was just an innocent bystander in this massive scheme. The federal prosecutors would gladly tear his life apart piece by piece. The arrogant, slick finance persona completely vanished from his face, replaced by the raw, primal terror of a desperate man watching his entire life disintegrate before his eyes. He slowly turned his head to look at Madison, his eyes wide with unadulterated horror as the severe legal reality finally registered in his mind. Your parents committed federal wire fraud using her name, DeAndre said, his voice cracking with absolute panic. Madison took a step back, her expensive designer heel catching on the plush rug. She looked everywhere except at her husband. Her eyes darted from the red folder on the desk to the security guards standing like statues by the door, and finally to me silently begging for a lifeline I was absolutely never going to throw her. "I asked you a question," DeAndre shouted, the volume of his voice making the glass walls of my office rattle. "Did you know your mother and father committed a federal crime to fund your companies?" "They did not commit a crime," Madison shrieked, her voice reaching a painful pitch. "It was a family arrangement, DeAndre. Alyssa owed us. She has always been incredibly selfish. When she moved to London, she abandoned the family completely. Mom and Dad spent a fortune raising her, giving her a privileged life, and she walked away to hoard corporate money. They used her credit as collateral because she owed them for everything. It was a temporary measure to get my startups off the ground." "A temporary measure," DeAndre repeated, running both of his hands over his closely shaved head. His breathing was becoming shallow and rapid. "You cannot use someone else's identity as a temporary measure. That is not a family arrangement, Madison. That is a felony." He began pacing the length of my office, muttering to himself as the legal and professional implications crashed down on him. "I am a licensed financial broker. I hold a Series 7 and a Series 63 license. The Securities and Exchange Commission monitors every single transaction associated with my name. If the federal government traces those forged loan originations to the shell companies that pay my consulting fees, they will not just revoke my broker licenses, they will bar me from the financial industry for life." DeAndre stopped pacing and glared at Madison with pure, unadulterated disgust. "I filed joint tax returns with you for the last 5 years, he hissed, stepping closer to her. "The down payment for our luxury condo in Tribeca came from those accounts. The lease on my car came from those accounts. I am legally tethered to a massive ongoing wire fraud conspiracy because your parents could not afford to fund your delusional business fantasies. I could face a decade in federal prison because of your family." Madison started to cry, heavy tears ruining her meticulous makeup. "You are overreacting," she sobbed, reaching out to grab his arm. "Dad has powerful lawyers. He knows people in the banking sector. He will fix this, DeAndre. We just need to get Alyssa to drop the foreclosure and sign a release form. We can figure it out." I sat quietly in my ergonomic chair watching the foundation of their marriage disintegrate in real time. It was a fascinating spectacle. DeAndre had married Madison strictly for the prestige and the supposed generational wealth of her family name. Madison had married DeAndre because he looked perfect in their country club photos and stroked her relentless ego. Now that the money was gone and the threat of prison loomed, the fragile transactional nature of their relationship was exposed for exactly what it was. "There is no fixing this," I finally said, my calm voice slicing through Madison's hysterical sobbing. "Your father does not have powerful lawyers, Madison. He cannot afford them, and his friends in the banking sector will not touch him once they realize he is under federal investigation for identity theft. The money is gone, the credit is frozen, the illusion is over." DeAndre turned back to me, his eyes wide and desperate. "Alyssa, please," he begged, all his previous arrogance completely erased. "I had absolutely no idea they forged the documents. You have to believe me. I thought the Capitol was clean. You cannot let the feds drag me into this. My career will be destroyed." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass desk and interlocking my fingers. "Whether you knew about the forgery or not is irrelevant to me," I stated coldly. "You gladly spent the stolen money to fund a lifestyle you did not earn, while treating me like dirt on your shoe. I am not your personal savior. However, I am actually your primary creditor. And as your primary creditor, I am issuing my first and only ultimatum." I reached into the red folder and extracted a single crisp sheet of paper. I slid it across the glass desk toward Madison. She stared at it, her tear-streaked face twisting in confusion. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It is a formal 48-hour notice to vacate," I stated. DeAndre snatched the paper from the desk, his eyes darting across the legal text. His jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. "The luxury Tribeca condominium you two currently reside in was listed as collateral on the third commercial loan my parents fraudulently secured," I explained, leaning back in my chair. "Because the loan is in default and I am the sole owner of that debt, the property belongs to my fund. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your designer bags and vacate the premises. If you are still inside that apartment by Wednesday morning, I will have the city sheriff physically remove you, and your belongings will be left on the sidewalk." Madison let out a piercing shriek. "You cannot do this!" she screamed, slamming her fists against the desk. "That is my home. You have no right to throw me out. I am your sister. You stopped being my sister the moment you laughed while our mother told me I was an unloved burden," I replied coldly. "You wanted to build an empire on stolen money. Now you get to experience what happens when the real owner comes to collect." DeAndre grabbed Madison by the arm. He crumpled the eviction notice in his fist. "We can fight this in court," he threatened. "You cannot just seize a primary residence without a hearing." I smiled, a tight, calculated expression. "You are absolutely welcome to hire a lawyer and challenge the eviction, DeAndre. But the second you file an injunction, you force the entire lending history into public record. Federal investigators will immediately subpoena the fraudulent loan applications. They will look at the wire transfers to your shell companies and the Tribeca condo you bought with stolen funds. If you want to go to court, I will gladly hand over the entire red folder to the FBI today. Are you ready to risk federal prison to keep a condo you cannot even afford?" DeAndre froze. The reality of the trap paralyzed him. He was legally and financially cornered. He could not fight the eviction without exposing himself to federal wire fraud charges. The pristine financial career he bragged about was hanging by a thread. He knew I was holding the scissors. He looked at Madison, who was now sobbing hysterically, begging him to fix the situation. DeAndre just shook his head, his face a mask of absolute defeat. "We are leaving," he muttered, grabbing her arm tighter. Madison dug her heels into the plush carpet. "No, I am not leaving. I am calling Dad." I signaled to the two security guards standing silently by the door. "Gentlemen, please escort these two individuals out of the building and ensure their names are permanently added to the banned visitor list." The guards stepped forward. "Sir, ma'am, it is time to go." The lead guard set his voice, leaving no room for argument. DeAndre did not resist. He practically dragged a screaming, hysterical Madison out of my office. Her shrieks echoed across the trading floor, a humiliating spectacle witnessed by dozens of investment bankers. The golden child was now being physically removed like a common trespasser. The heavy glass doors swung shut, cutting off the sound of her frantic sobbing. The chaotic energy vanished, leaving my office in absolute pristine silence. I took a deep breath, smoothing the paperwork on my desk. The first phase of my plan had been executed flawlessly. They were stripped of their stolen wealth and facing immediate eviction. I knew the hardest part was yet to come. My parents were desperate, and desperate people always try to change the rules of the game. Right on cue, the private line on my desk console began to ring. I glanced at the caller ID. It was William. I pressed the flashing button and put the call on speaker. I fully expected him to resume screaming, to hurl more empty threats about calling the authorities. Instead, a soft, sickeningly sweet voice filled the room. "Alyssa, honey, William," said, his tone dripping with fake, desperate affection. "I think things got a little out of hand this morning. We are family, and family shouldn't fight like this. Your mother and I want to make things right. Let us talk about this over a nice early Thanksgiving dinner at the house. Please, sweetheart, just come home." I ended the call without giving William a definitive answer. I simply set my phone face down on the glass desk and let him sweat. He wanted me to come home for an early Thanksgiving dinner. He wanted to play family. I knew exactly what this was. It was a desperate, calculated trap. William and Catherine were cornered rats, and cornered rats always tried to bite their way out. But I was not the defenseless girl they used to bully. I was the executioner, and I was going to finish the job. I left my office, took the private elevator down to the private garage, and got behind the wheel of my car. The drive from Manhattan to the Connecticut estate took 1 hour. I used the time to mentally prepare for the circus of manipulation awaiting me. The autumn leaves were falling across the winding suburban roads, painting a picturesque American landscape that completely masked the toxic rot festering inside these massive mansions. I pulled through the wrought iron gates of the estate and parked my sleek black sedan right in the center of the circular driveway. Before I could even reach the front steps, the heavy oak door swung open. Catherine stood in the doorway wearing a beige cashmere sweater and an expression of profound manufactured sorrow. Her eyes were red, though I suspected she had used eye drops to achieve the effect. She rushed forward with arms outstretched, attempting to pull me into a tight embrace. I smoothly sidestepped her, leaving her grasping empty air. "Alyssa, my beautiful girl," Catherine gasped, pressing a hand against her chest, as if wounded by my rejection. "I am so incredibly sorry for what happened at your birthday dinner. I was not in my right mind. My doctor recently adjusted my anxiety medication, and combined with the champagne, I had a terrible adverse reaction. I did not mean a single word I said. You are my daughter, and I love you so much. Please forgive me." I stared at her, analyzing the performance. It was a classic Catherine maneuver. Deflect accountability, blame an external factor, and demand immediate forgiveness. I did not offer her a smile or a single word of comfort. I just stared at her until the silence became unbearable, and she nervously stepped aside to let me into the foyer. The atmosphere inside the house was suffocating. The usual classical music that echoed through the halls was absent. Instead, the air was thick with the heavy, frantic energy of people realizing their entire existence was a fraud. I walked toward the living room and immediately spotted DeAndre. The arrogant, untouchable finance broker from my office was entirely gone. He was pacing aggressively back and forth across the Persian rug, sweating profusely through his expensive dress shirt. He had loosened his silk tie and unbuttoned his collar, muttering under his breath, while obsessively checking his phone. Every time the screen remained dark, his jaw clenched tighter. He looked like a man who knew the federal authorities were already circling his life. Madison was sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, her face buried in her hands. She looked completely miserable, stripped of her usual haughty demeanor. She did not even look up when I walked into the room. Her startups were dead, her luxury condo was seized, and her marriage was hanging by a single fraying thread. The golden child was finally experiencing the crushing weight of reality. William emerged from his private study wearing a forced, jovial smile that did not reach his cold eyes. He clapped his hands together desperately, trying to inject some false warmth into the room. "Alyssa, you made it. William announced, striding forward as if the explosive phone calls from earlier that morning had never happened. I am so glad you decided to join us. Your mother has been cooking all day. We really need to put this silly little misunderstanding behind us and remember what is truly important. A silly little misunderstanding. That was how he categorized massive identity theft, corporate fraud, and decades of emotional abuse. Come along, sweetheart. William continued, gesturing toward the formal dining room. Let us sit down and have a nice family meal. We have so much to be thankful for this year. I followed him down the long hallway, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. We entered the grand dining room. The crystal chandelier illuminated the long table. Right in the center sat a massive, perfectly roasted turkey surrounded by elegant bowls of holiday sides. But my eyes immediately bypassed the food. Resting directly next to the serving platter, sitting perfectly parallel to my assigned dinner plate, was a thick, neatly organized stack of legal documents with a silver pen resting on top. I took my seat at the long table, intentionally ignoring the thick stack of legal documents resting inches from my plate. William took his place at the head of the table, attempting to project the image of a benevolent patriarch. Catherine sat opposite him, while Madison and DeAndre occupied the chairs across from me. The tension in the room was so thick, it practically suffocated the scent of the roasted turkey. Catherine immediately grabbed the serving spoon, piling sweet potatoes onto her china plate with trembling hands. She pasted on a bright, completely artificial smile. Do you remember that Thanksgiving when you were 12, Alyssa? Catherine asked, her voice dripping with manufactured nostalgia. We all went out to the Hamptons. You and Madison spent the entire weekend building sandcastles on the beach and helping me bake pies. We have always had such beautiful family traditions. It breaks my heart that you feel so distant from us now. I did not touch my silverware. I looked directly into her desperate, calculating eyes. We never went to the Hamptons for Thanksgiving when I was 12, I corrected her, my voice echoing coldly off the crystal chandelier. You and William took Madison to the Hamptons. You left me locked in my room with a frozen dinner because I refused to let Madison cut the hair off my only doll. You told the housekeeper not to let me out until Monday morning. You do not miss our family traditions. You miss having a captive audience for your abuse. Catherine gasped, dramatically pressing her napkin against her chest, as if she had been physically struck. Madison stared at her empty plate, her shoulders tense, refusing to make eye contact with me. DeAndre clearly decided this was his moment to regain control. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the imported linen tablecloth. He adjusted his silk tie, slipping right back into his arrogant finance broker persona. He mistakenly believed he could intimidate me with industry jargon. Look, Alyssa, DeAndre said, lowering his voice to a condescending, placating tone. Emotions are running high right now, but we need to look at the macroeconomic fallout of what you are doing. You are letting personal grievances cloud your financial judgment. Calling in a debt of this magnitude without offering a standard restructuring period completely destabilizes the market liquidity of our entire portfolio. You are essentially destroying viable revenue-generating assets out of spite. It is bad business. If you actually understood leveraged buyouts and corporate equity stabilization, you would realize that freezing those accounts hurts your own acquisition fund. You are tanking your own long-term yields. I slowly picked up my crystal water glass, took a measured sip, and set it down precisely on the coaster. Are you seriously trying to lecture me on market liquidity using stolen capital? I asked, keeping my tone deadly calm. Your portfolio does not generate revenue, DeAndre. Your businesses are entirely insolvent. Furthermore, under Section 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code, my fund holds a perfected security interest in all your business assets. Since those loans were secured under federal wire fraud invoking Title 18, Section 1343 of the United States Code, your equity is completely void. You violated the negative covenants of the loan agreement the second you diverted commercial funds to pay for your luxury vehicle lease and your personal penthouse. DeAndre opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off instantly, my voice growing sharper. Do not try to explain corporate finance to the woman who owns your entire existence. If I report your fraudulent commingling of funds to the Securities and Exchange Commission tomorrow morning, you will permanently lose your broker license before lunchtime. I am not hurting my long-term yields. I am liquidating toxic liabilities. You are the toxic liability, DeAndre. The blood completely drained from his face. His mouth snapped shut. He looked down at his lap, thoroughly humiliated and legally paralyzed. He finally understood that I was not just a sibling holding a grudge. I was an apex predator in his own industry, and I held every single card. William slammed his heavy hand down on the table, rattling the silverware. The sharp noise shattered the remaining facade of a peaceful family dinner. His face was flushed with unadulterated rage. He could see that Catherine emotional manipulation had failed, and DeAndre financial intimidation had been effortlessly dismantled. There was absolutely no room left for acting. William reached across the table, grabbed the thick stack of legal documents resting next to the roasted turkey, and shoved them aggressively toward my plate. The silver pen rolled off the top, clattering loudly against the wood. He glared at me with pure, vicious hatred burning in his eyes. The tired charade was officially over. The stack of documents sitting beside my plate was over 50 pages thick, bound perfectly with a navy blue legal cover. The title, printed in bold black letters across the top, read Retroactive Authorization and Debt Relinquishment Agreement. I did not need to read the fine print to know exactly what it contained. This was their get-out-of-jail-free card. It was a legally binding contract that would retroactively authorize their identity theft, pardon the forged signatures on the commercial loans, and completely erase my legal right to collect the millions of dollars they had stolen. If I signed my name at the bottom of that page, their federal crimes would vanish and my investment fund would absorb the catastrophic financial loss. William leaned across the table, tapping his thick finger against the documents. "We had our lawyers draft this up this morning," William said, his voice straining to maintain a calm, reasonable tone. "It is very simple, Alyssa. You sign these papers and the entire debt is officially transferred back into the family trust. We will handle the restructuring internally. You drop the foreclosure on Madison's condo, you unfreeze our accounts, and this whole ugly situation simply goes away. We can go back to being a family." I looked at him, completely repulsed by his audacity. "You want me to sign a legal document pardoning you for committing federal wire fraud," I stated, making sure the reality of his request hung heavily in the air. "You want me to absorb millions of dollars in toxic debt so you can continue living a lie, and you are framing this as a favor to the family." Madison suddenly burst into tears. It was not her usual performative, manipulative crying. It was the ugly, desperate sobbing of a woman who was watching her entire life disintegrate. She slammed her hands flat against the table. "You have to sign it, Alyssa!" Madison shrieked, her voice echoing through the massive dining room. "DeAndre is going to leave me. He packed his bags this morning. He told me if his broker license gets revoked because of this, he is filing for divorce and suing me for damages. You cannot destroy my marriage just because you are jealous of me." "Jealous of you?" I repeated, my tone dropping to an icy whisper. "You are bankrupt. Your businesses are fake, and your husband is only staying with you to avoid a federal indictment. There is absolutely nothing about your life that I want, Madison." Catherine reached across the table, her manicured hand desperately grasping at my wrist. I pulled my arm away, instantly disgusted by her touch. "Alyssa, please," Catherine begged, tears finally spilling over her expertly applied mascara. "If you do not sign this, the bank will seize everything, the country club will find out, our friends will know we are ruined. The social humiliation will completely destroy us. You cannot do this to your own parents. Think about our reputation." "Your reputation is built on a felony," I reminded her coldly. "You stole my identity to fund your vanity. You did not care about my reputation when you told 40 people at my birthday dinner that I was an unloved burden. You only care about me now because I am holding the executioner's axe." DeAndre, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke up. His voice was completely devoid of its usual arrogant swagger. He looked physically ill. "Look at the numbers," Alyssa, DeAndre pleaded, leaning heavily against the table. If you push this to litigation, the legal fees will eat up whatever equity is left in the properties. The SEC will freeze everything for years. Nobody wins if you go to the authorities. If you sign the release, I can quietly liquidate the shell companies. I can restructure the remaining debt through private channels. I can make you whole over time. Just give us a chance to fix it. I looked around the table. 4 desperate people, utterly stripped of their power, begging the daughter they had abused for decades to save them from the consequences of their own actions. They were not sorry for the fraud. They were not sorry for the emotional torment. They were only sorry they got caught. They genuinely believed that family loyalty, the very concept they had weaponized against me my entire life, would compel me to absorb their sins. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy silver pen resting on top of the legal documents. The entire room went completely still. William let out a long, shaky breath of relief. Catherine clamped her hands over her mouth. Madison stopped crying, wiping her eyes frantically. DeAndre slumped back in his chair, believing he had successfully negotiated his way out of a federal indictment. They all watched me, holding their breath, waiting for the ink to hit the paper. I held the expensive pen between my hands, staring down at the signature line. Then, with one swift, violent motion, I snapped the silver pen completely in half. Ink splattered across the crisp white documents. I tossed the broken pieces directly onto the center of the perfectly roasted turkey. The sharp, satisfying crack of the expensive silver pen echoing through the silent dining room was the final spark needed to ignite the powder keg. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. The 2 broken halves of the pen rested on the golden skin of the roasted turkey, leaking dark black ink across the carefully prepared holiday meal. Then the illusion of civilized suburban life imploded. William sprang up from his chair with such sudden explosive force that the heavy mahogany seat tipped backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. His face turned a dangerous mottled shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar. He reached out with a trembling, furious hand and grabbed the heavy crystal vase sitting in the center of the table. With a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated rage, he swept his arm across the linen tablecloth. The crystal vase flew through the air and smashed violently against the far wall. Cold water-white roses and jagged shards of heavy glass exploded across the pristine dining room. Catherine let out a piercing shriek, covering her head with both of her shaking hands. Madison flinched, curling her whole body away from the flying debris, while DeAndre instinctively raised both his arms to shield his face. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I sat perfectly upright in my chair, watching my father transform into the volatile, narcissistic monster he had always kept hidden behind closed doors. "You ungrateful, malicious little brat!" William screamed, his voice vibrating with a terrifying intensity that rattled the remaining glasses on the table. "You think you can walk into my house and dictate terms to me? You think you can destroy the life of your sister and hold my finances hostage? I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. I fed you, clothed you, and tolerated your miserable existence for decades. You owe me everything. That pristine credit score you are so incredibly proud of, that belongs to me. You belong to me. Using your name was not theft, Alyssa. It was taking what was rightfully mine. You are my daughter, and your assets are my assets." The sheer delusion of his rant was staggering. He felt absolutely no remorse for committing federal wire fraud. In his twisted, narcissistic mind, stealing my identity was simply a father collecting a debt from a child he viewed as property. "You are going to sign a new copy of that release agreement right now." William continued, stepping around the table and pointing a thick, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You are going to sign it, or I will make sure you never work a single day in Manhattan again. You think you are some untouchable Wall Street executive? You think managing a real estate fund makes you invincible. I have connections, Alyssa. I play golf with the board members of the biggest private equity firms on the East Coast. I know the executives who bankroll your entire industry." He was pacing now, his heavy footsteps crunching over the broken crystal on the floor. His voice grew louder, laced with a desperate, venomous threat. I will make one phone call and I will destroy your professional reputation before you even get back to the city. William yelled, his face slick with sweat. I will tell them you are an unstable, vindictive liability who embezzles corporate funds to settle petty family disputes. I will drag your name through the mud until you are blacklisted from every major brokerage firm in the country. You will be completely ruined. You will lose your penthouse, your six-figure salary, and your precious little title. You will be begging to come back here and wash the floors just to survive. Do not test me. I will end you. The tirade echoed through the dining room, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Catherine was weeping silently into her napkin. Madison and DeAndre stared at William in shock, realizing that the man who had bankrolled their lavish lifestyle was completely unhinged. They had spent their entire lives treating him like a god, and now they were witnessing his absolute collapse. I looked at the sharp, broken glass littering the hardwood floor, then up at the furious, sweating face of my father. His aggressive threats were entirely empty. His powerful, elite connections were completely fake. He was merely a bankrupt financial fraud desperately trying to bully a corporate debt collector. I remained perfectly still, completely untouched by his pathetic display of uncontrollable rage. I did not raise my voice, and I did not even bother to argue with his wild, narcissistic delusions. Instead, I slowly reached my hand deep down into my black bag, resting directly beside my dining chair. My fingers brushed against the thick premium paper of the manila envelope I had prepared specifically for this moment. I pulled it out of my bag and placed it flat on the only dry, clean section of the linen tablecloth left. I pushed it firmly across the polished wood, sliding it right past the ruined holiday turkey and the splattered black ink. It came to a smooth stop just inches from where William was standing. His chest was still heaving from his violent outburst, but his eyes immediately darted down to the unassuming envelope. He glared at it suspiciously, as if it might physically burn him. "What is this now?" "Alyssa?" William sneered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Another one of your pathetic little corporate threats. Are you trying to hand me a fake lawsuit?" I did not answer him. I just kept my eyes locked on his face, waiting for him to open it. William snatched the envelope off the table with a harsh, jerky motion. He ripped the top open and yanked out the thick stack of legal papers inside. Catherine stopped crying for a brief second, peering over his arm to see what it was. Madison and DeAndre remained completely silent, watching the scene unfold with terrified fascination. William flipped to the first page, and his eyes scanned the bold black text at the top of the document. For a moment, he just stared at the words. Then a low, rumbling chuckle started in his chest. The chuckle quickly grew into a loud, booming laugh of pure, arrogant disbelief. "A notice of foreclosure." William laughed, tossing the papers back onto the table with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "You are actually trying to serve me with a notice of foreclosure on my own house. You really have lost your mind, Alyssa. You are so desperate to hurt us that you are making up fake documents." I remained entirely still, letting his laughter echo through the dining room. "You cannot foreclose on this estate." William continued, his voice dripping with absolute condescending superiority. "This house has been in our family for generations. I own the deed, free and clear. Yes, I took out a reverse mortgage 5 years ago to pay for Madison. Lavish wedding and to keep her businesses afloat. But the property belongs to me. You cannot just print out a piece of paper and pretend you own my home. A reverse mortgage means the bank pays me. Alyssa, I do not pay them until I sell the house or die. You clearly do not understand how real estate law actually works. You are making a fool of yourself." I let him finish his arrogant, uneducated lecture. I waited until the smug satisfaction fully settled onto his sweating face before I completely dismantled his reality. "You are right about one thing, William," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "You did take out a massive reverse mortgage to pay for a wedding your golden child did not deserve. But you are entirely wrong about how the law works. I suggest you pick those papers back up and read the fine print on page 4, specifically the clauses regarding the mandatory property tax and insurance payments required to maintain the terms of a reverse mortgage. William frowned, his smug smile faltering slightly. He reached down and snatched the papers again, flipping aggressively to the 4th page. A reverse mortgage requires the homeowner to keep all property taxes and insurance premiums current, I explained, enunciating every single word so the entire room could hear. If the homeowner fails to pay those taxes for a specific period, the loan goes into immediate default. The bank then has the legal right to call the entire loan due and initiate foreclosure proceedings. You have not paid your property taxes in over 2 years. William, you used that money to fund your country club memberships instead. William's face started to lose its color as he read the clauses, his eyes widening in horror. But that does not matter, he stammered defensively. My lender is Sentinel Regional Bank. They have been giving me extensions. They promised they would work with me on a payment plan. They would never foreclose. Sentinel Regional Bank went bankrupt in August, I stated coldly. My investment fund purchased their entire portfolio of distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. I bought your bank, William. I own your reverse mortgage. Your so-called extensions were completely nullified the moment my firm acquired the paper. You officially defaulted on this loan exactly 3 months ago. DeAndre let out a sharp gasp, backing away from the table as if the floor had suddenly turned to lava. He understood exactly what that meant. He knew the trap was locked. I pushed my chair back, letting the wooden legs scrape harshly against the polished floor. The sound broke the paralyzing silence that had completely engulfed the massive dining room. I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored skirt before calmly reaching for my luxurious cashmere coat draped over the back of the wooden chair. I slid my arms into the soft sleeves, adjusting the thick collar with meticulous care. You have exactly 48 hours, I announced, checking my luxury designer watch. The county sheriff will be arriving on Monday morning at precisely 8 o'clock to formally seal the doors and execute the eviction protocol. I highly suggest you spend this weekend packing whatever personal items you can actually fit into your vehicles. Any assets left inside the estate, including the antique furniture and the imported artwork, will become the legal property of my acquisition fund to offset your outstanding debt. Catherine let out a gut-wrenching wail. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor right in the middle of the broken crystal and spilled water. The elegant, sophisticated matriarch, who had spent her entire life judging others from a tall pedestal, was now literally crawling on the ruined hardwood. Alyssa. Please, Catherine sobbed, dragging herself toward my bare feet. You cannot take my home. Where will we go? We have no savings. We have nowhere to stay. I will give you my jewelry. I will give you the family silver. Just let us keep the house. I stepped back, refusing to let her touch my shoes. You should have thought about your housing situation before you decided to commit federal identity theft, I replied, my voice completely devoid of pity. You stole millions to buy your golden child a fake empire, and now the bill is finally due. You can use the silver to pay for a cheap motel. Madison spun around frantically, looking for someone to fix the nightmare. She grabbed DeAndre by the arm, digging her nails into his expensive suit jacket. Do something, Madison screamed, shaking him violently. You are a financial broker, DeAndre. Tell her this is illegal. Call your firm and get us a bridge loan. Do your job and fix this right now. DeAndre did not even look at his wife. He stood completely frozen, staring down at the foreclosure notice resting on the table. The reality of the catastrophic financial ruin had finally broken his arrogant spirit. His shoulders slumped and his eyes were hollow. There is no bridge loan, Madison, DeAndre muttered, his voice completely flat and defeated. Nobody is going to lend us a single dime. The house is gone. The businesses are dead. We are entirely bankrupt. Madison let go of his arm, taking a staggering step backward as she realized her husband was useless. Her perfect, wealthy lifestyle had officially evaporated. I turned away from the pathetic scene unfolding in the dining room and walked down the long hallway toward the grand foyer. My heels clicked rhythmically against the floor, signaling the end of an era. The opulent walls of the Connecticut estate felt different now. They no longer represented a prison of childhood trauma and conditional love. They represented my newest corporate asset. I reached the heavy oak front door and pulled it open. The biting cold wind of the dark November night swept into the heated foyer, whipping my hair around my face. The icy air felt incredibly refreshing. I stepped out onto the stone porch, breathing in the scent of pine and freedom. William stormed out of the dining room, racing down the hallway right behind me. His face was a mask of pure, frantic desperation mixed with toxic rage. He could not accept that he had been completely outmaneuvered by the daughter he considered worthless. "You are making the biggest mistake of your pathetic life, Alyssa!" William screamed, his voice echoing aggressively across the quiet suburban neighborhood. "You think you have won because you printed out some legal garbage, but you are nothing. You hear me? You are nothing without this family." I walked down the steps toward my waiting town car, completely ignoring his unhinged tantrum. The driver opened the rear door for me, and I slid into the warm leather seat. William rushed out onto the porch, gripping the wooden railing like a madman. "I will destroy you!" William roared into the dark night, waving his fists wildly in the air. "I am calling your CEO first thing Monday morning. I will tell David everything. You are going to lose your job, your fund, and your entire life. You will be utterly and permanently destroyed." I simply reached over and pressed the silver button to tightly roll up the heavy tinted window, sealing him outside. Inside the grand foyer, the heavy oak door slammed shut behind William. The echoing thud signaled the absolute end of their wealthy illusion. DeAndre stood frozen near the dining room entrance, listening to his father-in-law scream empty threats into the freezing night air. Catherine was still sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, surrounded by broken crystal and ruined turkey. DeAndre did not offer her a hand. He did not go outside to calm William. The slick, arrogant finance broker mind was already calculating his exit strategy. The ship was sinking, and DeAndre had absolutely no intention of drowning with a family of broke, delusional frauds. He turned on his heel and slipped away silently, taking the grand mahogany staircase 2 steps at a time. He moved with panicked urgency toward the primary guest suite they occupied whenever they visited Connecticut. As soon as he entered the room, DeAndre locked the door and dragged his imported Italian leather suitcases from the walk-in closet. He threw them open on the king-sized bed and began violently tossing his custom-tailored suits, silk ties, and velvet loafers into the bags. He moved to the dresser, sweeping his collection of luxury watches and gold cufflinks into a velvet pouch. Every single item had been purchased with stolen commercial loan money. With his physical assets secured, DeAndre pulled his laptop from his leather briefcase. He sat on the edge of the bed, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He bypassed the standard banking portals and logged directly into the hidden administrative accounts for Madison's 3 shell companies. There was exactly $62,000 of liquid cash remaining across the accounts. It was the last of the stolen capital. DeAndre quickly routed the funds through an encrypted digital protocol, wiring every single cent into a private offshore account he had established in the Cayman Islands 2 years ago. He watched the progress bar on the screen fill with green, his breathing shallow and rapid. "DeAndre, what are you doing?" DeAndre jumped, nearly dropping the laptop. Madison stood in the bedroom doorway. Her designer makeup was completely smeared down her cheeks, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She had come upstairs looking for her husband, desperately needing him to comfort her, to tell her he had a brilliant financial plan to save her fake empire. Instead, she found him packing his bags. Her gaze drifted from the open suitcases on the bed to the glowing laptop screen. She saw the wire transfer confirmation flashing in bright green letters. "Did you just empty my business accounts?" Madison asked, her voice trembling as she stepped further into the room. "You transferred my payroll money." "Your payroll money!" DeAndre scoffed, slamming the laptop shut and shoving it into his briefcase. You do not have a payroll, Madison. You do not have a business. You heard your sister downstairs. The entire operation is a massive federal crime. I am securing whatever liquid capital is left before the federal investigators freeze the secondary routing accounts. You are stealing from me, Madison shrieked, lunging toward his briefcase. We need that money for lawyers. We have to fight Alyssa. DeAndre easily shoved her backward. Madison stumbled, hitting the edge of the dresser. There is no fighting this, DeAndre yelled, his voice laced with pure venom. Your father committed wire fraud. Alyssa owns the debt. Your entire life is a pathetic, fabricated lie. You are not a visionary entrepreneur, Madison. Your wellness app made $14,000 last year. Your skincare line does not even have a manufacturer. You are a delusional, untalented hack who used stolen identity money to play dress-up in Manhattan. Madison gasped, clutching her chest, as if he had physically stabbed her. You promised me we were building an empire together, she sobbed, tears spilling over her eyelashes. You said you loved me. I loved the trust fund you claimed you had, DeAndre fired back, zipping up his suitcase with a harsh, aggressive tug. I married you because William bragged about his massive real estate portfolio and his elite country club connections. I married into this family because I wanted generational wealth. But you have absolutely nothing. You are completely bankrupt. Your parents are going to federal prison, and I am not letting the Securities and Exchange Commission take my broker license because your father is a moron. DeAndre reached into the front pocket of his briefcase. He pulled out a thick folded legal document and tossed it violently onto the bed. It landed right next to Madison's trembling hands. Sign the divorce papers, DeAndre commanded coldly. Madison collapsed onto the floor, screaming in pure agony. DeAndre grabbed his heavy bag, stepped right over his hysterically sobbing wife, and walked out the door without looking back. Madison remained on the floor of the primary guest suite long after the sound of DeAndre slamming the front door echoed through the massive house. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the plush carpet. She slowly pushed herself up, her tear-streaked face, catching her reflection in the gilded vanity mirror. The golden child, the visionary entrepreneur, the affluent socialite, was completely gone. She was entirely alone, clutching a stack of divorce papers printed on cheap legal paper. She knew she had to leave. My 48-hour eviction notice was absolute, and DeAndre had just confirmed the authorities would soon be dissecting their entire lives. Madison stumbled toward the massive walk-in closet, intending to pack her extensive collection of designer clothes. She reached for the top shelf, her hand grasping at empty air. DeAndre had taken all the imported Italian leather luggage. He had not left her a single duffel bag. A bitter, hysterical laugh escaped her throat. Madison marched down the grand staircase, her expensive heels abandoned in the bedroom, and pushed through the swinging doors into the catering kitchen. She yanked open the utility drawer and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty black plastic trash bags. She dragged them back upstairs. The symbolism was poetic. She spent the next hour frantically stuffing $1,000 silk dresses, limited edition handbags, and custom cashmere coats into literal garbage bags. The glamorous facade of her Manhattan lifestyle was reduced to shiny black plastic sacks sitting on the floor of a fraudulent estate. Madison hauled the trash bags down the stairs, dragging them out to her least luxury SUV. She threw the bags into the trunk, got behind the wheel, and drove away from the Connecticut mansion. She did not drive toward Manhattan. She knew her Tribeca condo was legally seized. Instead, she drove toward the county line, pulling into the flickering neon parking lot of a cheap, rundown roadside motel. She dragged 2 trash bags into the dingy lobby, the smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach hitting her senses. She approached the scratched laminate front desk, refusing to look the bored night clerk in the eye. She slapped her heavy platinum credit card onto the counter, demanding their best available suite. The clerk swiped the card. The machine beeped loudly. Declined, the clerk said, handing it back with a look of utter indifference. Madison snatched it back, her face flushing with hot humiliation. Try this one, she snapped, pulling a black corporate card from her wallet. The clerk swiped it. Another loud beep. Declined again, lady. You got cash or what? Madison's hands shook as she dug through her designer purse. She scraped together exactly $84 in crumpled bills, just enough to secure a standard room for a single night. She dragged her trash bags down the exterior hallway, unlocking a door that revealed a stained bedspread and flickering fluorescent lights. Sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress, Madison pulled out her phone. She needed a lifeline. She scrolled to her favorite contact, a wealthy socialite who frequently attended her country club brunches. The phone rang twice before going straight to voicemail. Madison gritted her teeth and dialed another friend, a woman who had just praised her business acumen the previous week. The line clicked open. Madison immediately burst into tears, begging for a guest room to stay in for a few days. "I cannot do that, Madison." The woman interrupted, her voice entirely devoid of sympathy. "DeAndre has been texting people all evening. He said your parents committed federal wire fraud and the FBI is getting involved. My husband is a corporate attorney. We cannot be associated with a federal investigation. Do not call this number again." The line went dead. Madison stared at the screen in pure shock. The high society circle she had desperately cultivated had instantly turned its back on her. The money was gone, and so was her social value. She was completely isolated, sitting in a cheap motel room with her wardrobe stuffed into garbage bags. Desperate for any form of comfort, Madison dialed her mother. Catherine answered on the first ring. "Mom," Madison sobbed into the receiver. "DeAndre left me. He took all the money. My friends blocked my number. I am in a motel and my cards are dead. Please come get me." Instead of offering maternal comfort, Catherine let out a frantic, dismissive sigh. "I cannot deal with your marriage right now, Madison," Catherine snapped, her voice vibrating with manic energy. "We are in the middle of a massive crisis. Your father is in his study, drafting a highly confidential dossier. We are sending it directly to the chief executive officer of Alyssa firm. We are going to war." Catherine ended the call, leaving her daughter stranded in a roadside motel without a second thought. Her entire focus was now channeled into pure, unadulterated vengeance against me. She marched into the smallest, most modestly decorated guest bedroom in the Connecticut estate, strategically avoiding the crystal chandeliers and imported artwork. She propped her smartphone against a stack of books, adjusted the lighting to cast deep shadows under her eyes, and hit the button to start a live broadcast on her social media pages. Within minutes, hundreds of her country club friends and local socialites were actively watching. Catherine stared into the camera lens and began to weep. It was a masterful, sickening performance. She completely ignored her own federal crimes and instead spun a horrific, fabricated narrative about her cruel, psychotic daughter. She told the viewers that I was a greedy corporate shark who was using an illegal loophole to forcefully evict my elderly, loving parents from their generational family home right before the holidays. She cried about how she had sacrificed absolutely everything to raise me, only for me to become a soulless monster, obsessed with destroying my own blood. By the time she finished her tearful monologue, she had launched a crowdfunding campaign online, begging her affluent community to help them hire emergency legal counsel to fight the supposedly illegal eviction. The comments section immediately flooded with outrage directed entirely at me. People I had known since childhood were typing vicious, hateful messages calling me a sociopath and a massive disgrace to the family. The donations started pouring in, funding their absolute delusion. While Catherine weaponized public sympathy upstairs, William was locked inside his mahogany study, weaponizing intense corporate sabotage. He sat at his large desk, his fingers striking the keyboard with furious, erratic energy. He was not just writing a standard complaint. He was drafting a highly defamatory, heavily fabricated legal dossier. He poured every ounce of his narcissistic rage into a 50-page document designed to completely obliterate my career in the financial district. William wrote that I was engaging in massive corporate embezzlement. He fabricated severe allegations of insider trading, claiming I was illegally using internal company algorithms to target and steal real estate properties from innocent suburban families for my own personal financial gain. He even manufactured fake accounting ledgers and attached forged emails to make his insane conspiracy theory look like a legitimate whistleblower report. He did not send this digital dossier to the Human Resources Department. He bypassed every standard corporate channel and emailed the massive file directly to David, the chief executive officer of my firm. William hit send with a loud, triumphant slap on his desk. He walked out of his study, found Catherine wiping away her fake tears, and proudly announced that my entire career was officially dead. He genuinely believed that a Wall Street chief executive would instantly fire me to avoid a massive public relations scandal. He thought he had just handed me a one-way ticket to federal prison. My phone buzzed relentlessly throughout the night, flooded with hate mail and violent threats from Catherine's viral social media campaign. I silenced the device, placed it face down on my nightstand, and went to sleep with a perfectly clear conscience. I arrived at the Manhattan office the next morning at exactly 7, carrying my iced coffee and wearing my sharpest tailored suit. The trading floor was unusually quiet. The aggressive, competitive hum of the financial sector was entirely replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. Dozens of investment bankers and wealth managers stopped what they were doing and stared at me as I walked past their glass desks. The whispers started immediately echoing softly against the office walls. My assistant was waiting anxiously right outside the closed door of my private office. She looked pale, completely terrified, and was clutching a stack of morning reports against her chest. She did not offer her usual cheerful good morning. She just pointed a visibly shaking finger toward the center of the executive floor. "David wants to see you right now," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the tense silence of the room. "He told security to hold all his calls, and he is waiting for you in the main executive boardroom." I turned and looked straight through the transparent walls of the massive corner boardroom. David was sitting alone at the head of the long polished table. A thick printed copy of William's fabricated dossier was resting directly in front of him, the bright red urgent flag attached to the cover page. He was staring down at the papers with an unreadable, intense expression on his face. I took a deep breath, adjusted the lapels of my designer blazer, pushed open the heavy glass door, and walked confidently inside. The heavy glass door sealed shut behind me, cutting off the nervous murmurs from the trading floor. The executive boardroom was vast and intimidating, featuring a massive polished mahogany table that stretched across the room. David sat at the far end. He was a ruthless 50-year-old billionaire who built this investment fund from the ground up. Resting precisely in the center of the table was the thick printed copy of the fabricated 50-page dossier William had emailed him during the night. A bright red urgent flag was stapled to the front cover. David did not look angry. He looked entirely unreadable. "Take a seat, Alyssa," David said, gesturing to the leather chair directly across from him. "We have an audience this morning." I sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I noticed the digital conference phone in the middle of the table was glowing with an active call connection. The timer showed the call had been going on for 5 minutes before I entered the room. "Are you there, William?" David asked, leaning toward the microphone. "I have Alyssa in the room with me now. You can proceed with your report." A heavy theatrical sigh echoed through the high-definition speakers. It was a masterful performance. William had clearly spent hours rehearsing this exact moment. He sounded like a broken, devastated father who was making the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good of corporate America. "David, thank you for taking my call." William began, his voice dripping with manufactured sorrow. "This is the hardest thing a parent ever has to do. I have spent my entire life trying to guide my daughter, trying to instill a strong moral compass in her. But yesterday, I uncovered something that completely shattered my heart. I realized that my own flesh and blood is actively destroying the reputation of your prestigious firm." I crossed my legs and rested my hands gracefully on the table. I did not interrupt him. I let him dig his own grave using a silver shovel. "Alyssa is not the brilliant executive you think she is." William continued, his tone shifting from sorrowful to aggressively authoritative. "She is a dangerous liability. I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing her personal financial records and auditing the acquisition protocols she uses at your company. The dossier I sent you contains undeniable proof of massive corporate embezzlement." She is utilizing your internal algorithms to illegally target vulnerable suburban families, driving their properties into artificial foreclosure, and then transferring those assets into hidden shell companies. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the severity of his fabricated accusations hang in the silent boardroom. She is stealing from you, David William warned. She is engaging in severe insider trading and masking it as aggressive portfolio management. I know it hurts me to say this about my own child, but you need to terminate her employment immediately and freeze all of her corporate access. If the Securities and Exchange Commission finds out about her illicit activities, your entire fund will face federal indictments. I am sharing this information with you because I am an honest man. I cannot simply stand by and watch a rogue employee destroy a legitimate Wall Street institution, even if that employee is my own daughter. William took another deep breath, sounding incredibly satisfied with his own performance. He firmly believed he had just delivered a fatal permanent blow to my entire career. He thought he was the ultimate puppet master, successfully pulling the strings from the comfort of his Connecticut estate. He was fully expecting David to explode in uncontrollable rage, to immediately demand my corporate security badge, and to have me forcefully escorted out of the building by armed guards. David leaned back in his heavy leather chair, steepling his fingers together. He looked down at the fabricated dossier, then looked directly up at me. His expression remained completely neutral. The heavy silence stretched on for several long seconds. "Is that everything, William?" David finally asked, keeping his voice perfectly level. "Yes, indeed," David William replied, sounding confident and victorious. "I highly suggest you call your legal team immediately to mitigate the damage she has caused." David reached forward and pressed the glowing red button on the digital conference console. The microphone muted instantly, cutting off any further noise from the Connecticut estate. The bright red light illuminated the otherwise quiet boardroom. David looked at the glowing button, then slowly turned his piercing gaze back to me. The neutral mask he wore completely dissolved. The corners of his mouth twitched upward. He let out a sudden and sharp bark of genuine amusement. Within seconds, the ruthless billionaire chief executive officer of my prestigious investment fund threw his head back and burst into very loud, uncontrollable laughter. David continued to laugh, the deep, booming sound filling the expansive executive boardroom. He actually had to reach up and wipe a single tear of genuine amusement from the corner of his eye. Through the thick glass walls of the conference room, I could see dozens of analysts and brokers staring in our direction, completely baffled by the sight of our notoriously ruthless chief executive officer losing his composure. On the other end of the muted conference call, William was sitting in his mahogany study in Connecticut, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation. I could practically picture my father smiling, adjusting his expensive tie, genuinely believing that David was laughing at my impending downfall. He thought he had successfully orchestrated my public execution, oblivious to his own demise. David finally caught his breath. He shook his head, still chuckling softly, and leaned forward to press the glowing red button on the digital console. The microphone unmuted with a sharp beep. William David said, his voice echoing with absolute corporate authority. "I have to admit, that was one of the most entertaining performances I have heard in my 30 years on Wall Street. You really missed your calling in theater." There was a brief, confused silence on the other end of the line. "I appreciate that," David William replied, his tone hesitant, trying to gauge the unexpected reaction. "But I assure you the evidence in that dossier is completely factual. We need to protect the integrity of the firm." "Protect the firm," David repeated, leaning back in his heavy leather chair. "William, let me make something abundantly clear to you. Alyssa is not a rogue employee. She is the most meticulous, transparent, and lethal acquisitions director I have ever hired. You see, 6 months ago, Alyssa walked into this exact boardroom. She sat in that exact chair and she handed our corporate compliance board a massive, undeniable mountain of evidence detailing severe identity theft. She fully disclosed every single fraudulent commercial loan you and your wife illegally secured using her pristine credit profile." I listened to the dead silence radiating from the conference phone. William had stopped breathing. My firm has known about your pathetic shell companies and your massive financial crimes for half a year, David continued, his voice turning to absolute ice. We authorized Alyssa to quietly purchase your toxic debt through our subsidiary funds because it was a highly lucrative distressed asset acquisition. We knew exactly who we were dealing with. We knew you were a desperate bankrupt fraud playing dress-up in the affluent suburbs. William stammered, his voice cracking into a high, panicked squeak. David, you do not understand. She is lying to you. Look at the dossier I sent. Oh, I have looked at it, David replied cheerfully, tapping his fingers against the thick printed document resting on the polished table. And that brings me to the absolute best part of this morning. You see, William, you just did us a massive favor. By fabricating false accounting ledgers and manufacturing fake emails, accusing a senior financial executive of embezzlement, and then transmitting those fabricated documents across state lines via a digital server, you just committed textbook federal wire fraud. Furthermore, attempting to use those fabricated documents to manipulate a publicly traded entity falls under severe federal extortion statutes. No, William gasped, the sheer terror finally choking him. No, I was just trying to warn you. I want to personally thank you for sending this dossier, David said, his tone dripping with lethal corporate satisfaction. It is a beautifully packaged confession. In fact, our legal department was so impressed with your creative writing skills that they forwarded the entire email, including your IP address and digital signature, directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 10 minutes ago. The federal authorities now have concrete written proof of your malicious intent delivered straight from your own outbox. You handed them the key to your own cell. A loud, chaotic clatter erupted through the speakers. William had physically dropped the phone. I could hear the heavy plastic device bouncing violently against his hardwood floor. He was completely paralyzed, his narcissistic delusions entirely shattered by the crushing weight of impending federal prison. Muffled, frantic shouting echoed in the background. Then there was a sharp rustling noise as someone snatched the phone off the floor. Alyssa Catherine shrieked into the receiver, her voice completely unhinged and vibrating with absolute hysteria. You cannot do this. You cannot let them take everything. We will leave. We will pack our bags right now. But you cannot take the house. You have no legal right to touch the Connecticut property. It does not belong to you. It belongs to your grandfather. That house is a sacred legacy. It is a generational estate. I listened to my mother scream through the speakerphone. Her panic was a symphony of poetic justice. She was grasping at the very foundation of her fabricated social status. A generational estate, I repeated, my voice dropping to absolute ice. The temperature in the Manhattan boardroom seemed to plunge. David sat quietly across the polished mahogany table, watching my execution of this final phase with immense professional respect. Tell me, Catherine, in all the years you and William have spent parading around that massive house, hosting your country club dinners, and pretending to be American royalty, did you ever actually read the fine print of my grandfather's will? Of course we read it! Catherine shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly through the high-definition speakers. The estate was left to your father. He is the sole male heir. It has been in his name for 3 years. You cannot just rewrite legal history because you are a vindictive, jealous corporate shark. You cannot steal a house from your own family. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the smooth table. You read the brief summary provided by the local probate attorney, I corrected her, stripping away every single ounce of her delusional confidence. You saw William's name printed on the first page and you completely stopped reading. You were entirely too busy measuring the grand foyer windows for imported silk drapes to actually examine the asset transfer clauses. You arrogant people just assumed that because William was the son, the sprawling property automatically became his absolute financial domain. What the hell are you talking about? William suddenly yelled in the background. He had clearly snatched the phone back from his hysterical wife. I signed the property deed, I pay the monthly maintenance fees, I leveraged the estate for the reverse mortgage to fund Madison. The bank accepted my signature. You signed a piece of paper that you fundamentally did not understand, I replied calmly. You legally leveraged an asset that you never actually owned. And now the actual legal owner is coming to collect the collateral. Wait, Alyssa, what does that mean? William demanded, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. He was finally realizing the massive scope of his colossal mistake. Alyssa, answer me right now. Tell me what you did. I reached forward and pressed the glowing red button on the digital console. The line went completely dead. I ended the call without offering a single additional word of explanation. I left them to drown in the heavy, suffocating silence of their own ignorance. I knew exactly what would happen next. I spent the rest of my Friday afternoon finalizing the hostile takeover of their useless shell companies, officially securing my executive promotion with David, and enjoying a quiet, luxurious dinner in downtown Manhattan. Meanwhile, William and Catherine were locked inside their Connecticut mansion, spiraling into a state of absolute terrified paranoia. I could easily picture the frantic chaos unfolding in the suburbs. They spent the entire weekend tearing their pristine mahogany study apart. They ripped through decades of old, dusty filing cabinets, frantically pulling out drawers and dumping paperwork onto the Persian rugs, desperately searching for the original certified copy of my grandfather's last will and testament. They aggressively called their expensive estate lawyers, leaving dozens of unhinged, screaming voicemails. But no reputable attorney picks up their personal cell phone on a Saturday afternoon for a toxic client who is actively under federal investigation for wire fraud. They were entirely isolated, completely cut off from the legal protection they always relied on. The massive decorated walls of their opulent suburban fortress were suddenly closing in on them. Every loud creak of the expensive hardwood floors, every sharp gust of autumn wind rattling the custom glass windows, sounded exactly like an approaching threat. They could not sleep. They could not eat. DeAndre had vanished with whatever liquid cash Madison had left. Madison was locked in a cheap roadside motel room, completely ignoring their frantic calls. William and Catherine were trapped alone in a sprawling mansion that suddenly felt like a massive ticking time bomb. They spent 48 hours suffocating in the terrifying realization that their entire elite reality was built on a catastrophic legal oversight. They were completely powerless. The weekend dragged on with agonizing slowness for the guilty. But for me, the weekend passed with beautiful, effortless precision. I rested quietly. I prepared my final legal documents, and I waited patiently for the final grand curtain to drop on their lifelong theatrical performance. The heavy darkness of Sunday night eventually gave way to the cold, crisp, and completely unforgiving light of an entirely new week. The brutal game was finally over for them now. The fateful Monday morning arrives. It is exactly 8 o'clock sharp. Monday morning arrived with the biting chill of a late November freeze. The antique grandfather clock in the grand foyer chimed exactly 8 times. The final echoing note had barely faded into the heavy silence of the Connecticut estate when the flashing red and blue lights pierced through the front windows. The pristine quiet of the exclusive suburban neighborhood was violently shattered. A fleet of 4 county sheriff cruisers rolled methodically up the long, circular driveway, their tires crunching loudly against the pristine gravel. Right behind the line of police vehicles crawled a massive commercial moving truck. The heavy diesel engine rumbled like a beast preparing to swallow the entire fabricated life of my parents. The sudden commotion drew the immediate attention of the entire affluent street. Neighbors who had spent decades attending Catherine lavish garden parties and William ostentatious holiday dinners stepped out onto their perfectly manicured lawns. Women in expensive cashmere robes and men holding their morning coffees gathered at the edges of their property lines. They watched in stunned fascination as the undeniable reality of an eviction unfolded at the most prestigious address in the subdivision. The heavy oak front door of the mansion swung open with a violent crash. William charged out onto the stone porch. He was not wearing his usual tailored business suit or his expensive golf attire. He wore a wrinkled dress shirt and disheveled trousers, looking like a man who had not slept or showered in 3 days. His face was a mask of feral, desperate panic. In his right hand, he tightly gripped a solid wood baseball bat. He brandished the weapon aggressively, his knuckles turning completely white. Catherine cowered in the shadows of the doorway behind him, clutching her silk robe tightly around her trembling frame, her face pale and terrified. "Step off my property right now!" William roared, his voice cracking with unhinged hysteria. His wild eyes darted between the marked cruisers and the towering moving truck. "I am warning all of you. You are trespassing on a private generational estate." The lead sheriff, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a completely unfazed expression, stepped out of the foremost cruiser. He adjusted his utility belt and walked calmly toward the base of the stone porch. Two armed deputies flanked him, keeping a watchful eye on the baseball bat in William's hand. The sheriff pulled a thick, folded legal document from his uniform pocket. "William, you need to lower the weapon immediately," the sheriff commanded, his voice projecting absolute, undeniable authority. "We are here to execute a lawful eviction and secure this premises pursuant to a finalized foreclosure order. You have been served the mandatory 48-hour notice to vacate. Your legal occupancy of this residence has officially expired." "This is an illegal corporate theft!" William screamed, swinging the baseball bat through the freezing air. He was completely losing his grip on reality, totally consumed by his narcissistic delusion. "You have no jurisdiction here. I am the sole male heir. This house is my absolute birthright. It belongs to me. My daughter used a malicious, fraudulent loophole to steal my deed. I am not leaving my home, and if any of you try to cross this threshold, I will defend my property." The sheriff stopped at the bottom of the steps. His demeanor shifted from patient to strictly procedural. The two deputies subtly placed their hands on their holsters, ready to neutralize the threat. The wealthy neighbors watching from the sidewalks gasped in collective horror. The untouchable elite patriarch of their social circle was having a violent criminal meltdown on his front porch. "I am giving you one final warning to drop the bat and step away from the door," the sheriff stated coldly. "If you refuse to comply with a court-ordered eviction, you will be placed under immediate arrest for obstructing justice and assaulting a law enforcement officer. You do not own this property anymore. You are legally classified as a hostile squatter. I am the owner." William shrieked, spittle flying from his lips as he refused to surrender the weapon. Just as the deputies unclipped their holsters to move in, a sleek, heavily armored black SUV turned off the main street and glided smoothly into the driveway. The massive vehicle bypassed the parked police cruisers and pulled to a stop directly in front of the stone porch. The heavy, tinted passenger door swung open. I slowly stepped out of the vehicle into the freezing morning air. I wore a pristine, tailored charcoal trench coat and towering leather boots. I walked past the sheriff and stood at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the pathetic, unhinged man waving a bat. In my black-gloved hands, I held a heavily bound, certified, and notarized leather document. I stepped forward, the leather binder against my side. My boots crunched rhythmically against the frozen gravel. The morning wind whipped my trench coat, but I did not feel the chill. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the unhinged man standing on the porch. William watched me approach, his face twisting into pure hatred. He gripped the wooden baseball bat so tightly, his knuckles looked ready to split open. "You malicious, ungrateful little thief!" William roared, his voice tearing through the quiet neighborhood. He vaulted down the stone steps, raising the baseball bat aggressively above his shoulder. He lunged directly toward me, completely blinded by his own toxic rage. He fully intended to strike me right there on the front lawn. He never made it past the hood of the first cruiser. Two armed deputies moved with brutal efficiency. They intercepted him, simultaneously tackling him hard against the side of the police vehicle. The heavy thud of his chest hitting the metal frame echoed sharply. They pinned his arms back, but he continued to thrash wildly, kicking and screaming obscenities. "Get your hands off me!" William bellowed, struggling against the deputies. "I am a respected resident of this community. She is a corporate criminal trying to steal my generational wealth." Up on the porch, Catherine finally broke out of her frozen state of shock. She stumbled down the stairs, her silk robe dragging across the frozen grass. She ran toward the edge of the property line, throwing her arms out toward the wealthy neighbors, watching the spectacle unfold. "Help us!" Catherine shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical desperation. "Call your lawyers. Call the country club board. She is illegally evicting us. Please, somebody do something. You know us. We hosted the charity gala last month." I watched the neighbors react. It was a beautiful display of affluent suburban preservation. The women in their expensive cashmere coats quickly turned their backs. The men holding their morning coffees shook their heads in disgust and retreated into their massive houses. Front doors clicked shut all down the street. High society loyalty vanished the exact second police cruisers appeared. Catherine fell to her knees on the frozen grass, weeping uncontrollably as her social standing evaporated into thin air. I turned my attention back to William. The deputies had him securely pinned, but they allowed him enough room to speak. He was breathing heavily, glaring at me with venomous, bloodshot eyes. "You think this piece of paper means anything?" William spat, gesturing aggressively toward the binder in my hands. "You think you can just buy a bank and kick me out of my father's house? I will tie you up in probate court for the next 4 decades. I will hire the most ruthless estate attorneys in the country. I will drain your corporate fund fighting this illegal foreclosure. My father left this estate to me. I am his only son. You are just a bitter spinster throwing a tantrum because you could not handle a simple birthday joke." I stopped walking. I stood exactly 3 feet away from him, close enough to see the cold sweat dripping down his forehead. I did not raise my voice. I simply shook my head slowly, feeling profound pity for his absolute ignorance. "You are not going to probate court, William," I stated, my voice slicing cleanly through the freezing air. "You cannot contest a will that was executed and finalized 3 years ago." I unclasped the heavy brass lock on the leather binder. I pulled out the very first certified notarized packet and handed it directly to the lead sheriff. He scanned the first page, checking the official state seals and federal watermarks. He nodded once, acknowledging the legal authority of the document, and stepped back, giving me full control. I pulled out the second copy and held it out toward William. The deputies loosened their grip just enough for him to free his right hand. He snatched the document from my fingers, his chest heaving with arrogant defiance. He looked down at the crisp white paper, fully expecting to find a fraudulent eviction notice or a standard corporate foreclosure mandate. Instead, he read the bold, capitalized legal heading printed at the very top of the page. He read the signature of the man who had drafted it. He read the exact terms of the asset transfer. I watched the arrogant, untouchable patriarch completely shatter. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His eyes widened in absolute unadulterated horror as his brain processed the catastrophic legal reality of the words on the page. His knees instantly buckled beneath him. The heavy wooden baseball bat slipped from his loosening grip and hit the frozen driveway with a hollow, echoing thud. William stared blankly at the thick black ink on the first page of the finalized document. His chest heaved erratically as his mind struggled to process the devastating legal reality right in front of him. For his entire adult life, he had paraded around the country club boasting about his massive inherited wealth and his prestigious generational estate. He had used this property as a weapon to make everyone else feel incredibly small. But my grandfather was not a fool. He was a brilliant, self-made businessman who saw right through his own son. My grandfather knew William was a reckless, narcissistic financial fraud who would inevitably bankrupt the family and destroy his grandchildren. So my grandfather did not leave the Connecticut estate to William. He never did not, for a single fleeting moment. Instead, he placed the entire property and the attached liquid assets into a fully ironclad, irrevocable trust. He explicitly named me as the sole undisputed beneficiary the exact moment I turned 30 years old. The legal phrasing was absolutely flawless and completely bulletproof. William and Catherine were never the rightful owners of this mansion. They were never American royalty. According to the strictly binding parameters of the trust, they were legally designated as nothing more than temporary tenants. They were granted conditional occupancy, which completely expired. the very second they engaged in financial crimes against the primary beneficiary. I watched William's mouth fall open as he read the secondary clauses. "You do not own this house," I stated, my voice ringing with cold, hard, absolute certainty across the frozen lawn. "You never owned it, William. When you desperately needed cash to fund your golden child fake startup companies and pay for her lavish wedding, you went to a commercial bank. You tried to leverage a property you did not legally possess. The bank demanded the signature of the actual deed holder, so you stole my identity. You forged my signature on those reverse mortgage applications to borrow millions of dollars against a house that I already owned." Catherine let out a strangled, pathetic gasp from the stone porch. She covered her face with her shaking hands, her knees giving out completely. She slumped against the heavy oak front door, her luxurious silk robe pooling in the frost. The sheer magnitude of their colossal stupidity was finally crashing down on them. "I am not stealing your home," I continued, taking one calculated step closer to where he knelt on the freezing gravel. "I am legally evicting hostile bankrupt squatters from my own personal property. You committed severe federal wire fraud to place a toxic mortgage on my estate, and then you defaulted on the payments. You actively tried to destroy my financial future to protect your pathetic illusion of wealth. But I bought the debt. I control the trust. I hold the deed. This entire physical property, every single blade of grass, and every crystal chandelier inside, belongs exclusively to me." William could not formulate a single coherent word. He was completely paralyzed, staring down at the binding legal document that effectively stripped him of his entire fake identity. The arrogant patriarch was entirely gone. He was just a pathetic, shivering fraud, kneeling in the dirt, publicly exposed in front of his wealthy, judgmental neighbors. The absolute humiliation was visibly crushing him. He dropped the leather binder onto the driveway, his hands shaking violently as he stared at the frozen ground. "You thought you could discard me at a birthday dinner," I said, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy or regret. "You thought you could publicly announce that I was an unloved burden and just walk away without a single consequence. You severely underestimated the daughter you spent 33 years actively abusing." Suddenly, a new sharp sound cut through the freezing morning air. It was not the familiar rhythmic wail of local police sirens. It was a deep, aggressive, alternating siren echoing rapidly from the main road leading into the exclusive subdivision. The local sheriff and his deputies instantly stepped back, turning their attention toward the gated entrance of the neighborhood. The wealthy neighbors, watching from their pristine sidewalks, began to murmur nervously, pointing toward the approaching commotion. 3 sleek, heavily armored black sedans turned aggressively into the long circular driveway. They completely bypassed the local cruisers moving with intense tactical precision. The heavy vehicles screeched to a halt right behind my car, completely blocking any possible exit from the estate. The doors of the sedans flew open simultaneously. Several men and women wearing dark tactical jackets with large yellow letters printed across their backs stepped out onto the gravel. The FBI had officially arrived to arrest William for federal identity theft and severe bank fraud, effectively ending his long reign of malicious deception permanently. The FBI agents moved with swift, uncompromising efficiency. 2 agents grabbed William by the arms, spinning him around and slamming him chest first against the hood of the black sedan. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists echoed across the frozen driveway. William did not fight back this time. The arrogant, untouchable patriarch was completely broken. He wept openly, his tears freezing on his cheeks as he babbled incoherent, desperate apologies to the federal agents. He begged them to call his country club friends, insisting this was all a massive misunderstanding. The agents ignored his pathetic pleas entirely. They forced his head down and shoved him roughly into the back of the armored vehicle, slamming the heavy door shut and trapping him inside his new, inescapable reality. Catherine watched her husband get hauled away like a common criminal. She did not scream or try to run to his defense. She simply collapsed onto the icy concrete curb at the end of the driveway. The moving crew had finished clearing out the last of the unauthorized belongings, leaving Catherine with exactly 2 hastily packed designer suitcases. She sat on the freezing sidewalk, shivering in her thin silk robe, staring blankly at the expensive imported leather bags that now contained her entire net worth. The elite socialite who had humiliated me in front of 40 guests just a few weeks ago was now a homeless, penniless spectator on the street she used to rule. A loud, rattling engine broke the tension. A beat-up, rust-covered taxicab sputtered down the pristine suburban street and jerked to a halt right next to where Catherine sat. The passenger door flung open, and Madison practically fell out onto the asphalt. She was a complete disaster. Her hair was matted, her expensive clothes were deeply wrinkled, and she was clutching a single plastic trash bag. Madison threw herself onto the curb next to Catherine, sobbing with violent chest-heaving gasps. "DeAndre is completely gone," Madison wailed, her voice cracking with absolute despair. "I woke up in the motel and federal agents were banging on the door. They are investigating him for massive securities fraud and insider trading. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze every single offshore account he tried to hide. He abandoned me and fled the state. I have absolutely nothing left. Mom, what are we going to do?" Catherine could not answer her. The 2 women just sat there on the curb, clutching their pathetic luggage, crying into the freezing November wind. They both slowly turned their red, swollen eyes toward me. They looked up at me, standing tall and completely immaculate in my tailored trench coat. They were silently begging for a lifeline, waiting for the innate family loyalty they had weaponized for decades to magically compel me to save them. They wanted me to offer them a warm bed, a check, or even just a sliver of basic human sympathy. I looked down at the 2 women who had spent my entire life making me feel like a worthless burden. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No anger, no sadness, and certainly no mercy. I did not offer them a single dime. I did not offer them shelter. I simply turned my back and walked away, leaving them to face the sheer, unadulterated consequences of their own malicious greed. The black sedans revved their engines and pulled away, carrying William to federal holding. The local police cruisers and the moving truck followed closely behind, leaving Catherine and Madison stranded on the empty street. I walked up the stone steps and crossed the threshold into the grand foyer of the estate. The heavy oak door clicked firmly shut behind me, instantly cutting off the pathetic sounds of their sobbing and sealing them outside in the cold. The massive mansion was now completely and beautifully silent. I slipped off my coat, draped it over the banister, and walked into the pristine kitchen. Sitting on the marble island was an open bottle of vintage red wine William had been drinking earlier that morning. I picked up a crystal glass, poured myself a generous measure of the rich, dark liquid, and walked slowly through the quiet, empty halls. I pushed open the French doors and stepped out onto the expansive back balcony. The morning sun was finally breaking through the heavy winter clouds, casting a brilliant golden light across the vast, peaceful property that was legally, rightfully, and permanently mine. I took a deep, calming breath of the morning air, feeling the weight of the past 33 years completely lift from my shoulders. I smiled, raised my crystal glass toward the bright, empty sky, taking in the absolute beauty of my empire, and whispered softly into the wind, "Thank you."